that to your father.
How could I have a child like you? Took everything, my pride, my love, my honor. But tonight, his mother will take it all back.
Why did it turn out like this?
The ballroom light poured like honey across the wooden floor. A jazz band played Fly Me to the Moon. Crystal clinked. Champagne drifted through the air. White lilies everywhere. It was all so perfect. It was almost artificial. At table 18 near the kitchen door sat Robert Hale, his old Navy suit slightly wrinkled at the wrists. In front of him, a half-empty glass of water. No one spoke to him. Every time a waiter passed by, they only nodded. The kind of nod given to someone they pity, the poor father of the bride. He looked around, only to see glossy smiles, confident faces, and a light that no longer belonged to him. On stage, his daughter, Samantha Hale, was shining in her white wedding dress, sparkling like a snowstorm under the lights. Next to her stood Ethan Whitmore, the groom, handsome, his collar straight as a blade. The Whitmore family sat in the front row, their eyes like silver mirrors, reflecting, but never really seeing. Then the DJ tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, our lovely bride would like to kings a few words." Applause rang out, bustling, sharp, like a drumbeat before an execution. Samantha stepped up to the mic, her head held high, her voice clear and confident. "Good evening, everyone. I just want to thank you all for being here to celebrate the happiest day of my life." Robert bowed his head slightly. He had waited 8 years to hear his child say, "Thank you, Dad." One word would have been enough, but the next sentence stabbed him in the chest. "You know," she said, her voice trembling slightly, then steady again, "I grew up watching my mom fight for everything we had. She was the strong one. My father tried his best, but life wasn't kind to him. He never really made much of himself." A few polite laughs. Robert's hands began to shake. He tried to smile, but his face wouldn't obey. "When Mom got sick," Samantha continued, "we lost everything. The house, the savings. It was hard, watching her die, knowing she was ashamed of the life she'd built. But she taught me something. That you can rise above your circumstances. That class isn't about birth. It's about choice." The room changed. Eyes turned toward table 18. He heard a whisper. "Poor thing." Each whisper felt like a needle through his skin. He looked down at his calloused hands, hands that had once signed Defense Department contracts, that had held secrets the government protected. Now, to the world, they were the hands of a loser. Samantha raised her glass toward the Whitmore table. "To the Whitmore family, for showing me what real success and dignity look like, for welcoming me into a world I never thought I'd belong to." Applause exploded, like firecrackers. Robert felt the floor tremble. Or maybe it was just his heart. He looked up and met the eyes of Charles Whitmore. The silver-haired man nodded, a thin smile, reserved for the poor man in the wrong seat. "And to my real father figure now, Mr. Whitmore, thank you for showing me what a real man can accomplish." The music stopped. No one laughed. Robert heard a dry explosion inside his head, like a grenade rolling out of his hand. His daughter, the only person he had ever trusted completely, had just called someone else her real father. And he an extra, sitting out of place at his own daughter's ceremony. The bride raised her glass one last time. Her voice trembled, but it carried pride. And finally, to my father, who, despite his limitations, taught me exactly what I didn't want to become. Laughter erupted. A few whistles cut the air. She's brutal. Well, truth hurts. Robert set down his glass. The water inside trembled, his hands no longer shaking, just cold. Time stood still. He saw Evelyn, his wife, 8 years ago in the hospital, her thin hand gripping his. If she uses this pain to gain self-esteem, you will stop her. Promise? He had promised, and he always kept his word. Samantha finished her speech to thunderous applause. The Whitmores stood and clapped proudly. She bowed her head, smiling bright, the lights making her glow like a jewel. At table 18, Robert Hale remained seated, silent, his eyes fixed on his daughter. No anger, no tears, just silence. The kind of silence known only by men who have been to war and know exactly when to strike back. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his antique Omega watch, and touched the glass. 8:45 p.m. As the music started again, Robert closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he opened them, his gaze sharp. A promise had just been made. When his eyes left the old clock, the applause finally died down. All that was left was the clinking of glasses and the murmur of voices, breaking like waves in his heart. The yellow lights dimmed. The violin changed to a new melody, gentle, but to him it sounded like a farewell prayer. The 63-year-old father sat in the middle of his own son's lavish party, but felt like a ghost in a crowd of strangers. At the next table, a young woman turned to her husband and whispered softly, "Did you hear? The bride says her father was once so poor he had to sell his house." Her husband nodded, smiling sympathetically. Robert heard every word, so clearly. He thought they were speaking right into his ear. He looked around. No one was looking back. Even the people who had shaken his hand that morning now avoided his gaze, like the plague. Even Samantha, who had filled the room with laughter, now held her husband's arm, leaned her shoulder against his, and didn't look back once. Amid the rows of white tablecloth tables, he suddenly felt as forlorn as a forgotten, outmoded object. In that moment, memories flooded back. Boston Hospital, 2017. The smell of disinfectant. The endless beep, 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 beep monitor. Evelyn lay on the bed, her dry hands clutching his. "Honey, if in the future I use this pain to beautify myself, then tell me, okay?" Robert nodded, tears falling onto the back of her hand. "I promise," he whispered. 8 years. He kept his word, silent, patient, living simply so his daughter would think he was poor. 8 years of believing that if she didn't have money, maybe she would learn kindness. But tonight, that belief died with the laughter of 200 strangers. The waiter set a plate of cake down before him. "Chocolate mousse, sir." Robert looked down. The cake was decorated with white chocolate hearts. He chuckled, a silent laugh. "Sweet," he muttered. "Yes, too sweet for a funeral." He took out his phone and opened an old photo. Evelyn, smiling gently, her hair tousled by the sea breeze, her arm around 13-year-old Samantha. A simple family, without luxury, but full of warmth. The scene blurred, not because the photo was unclear, but because his eyes were wet. "I've kept quiet, Eve," he thought, "but perhaps it's time you spoke for me." The MC's voice rang out again, falsely cheerful. "Let's welcome the newlyweds to the dance floor." Cheers erupted. Samantha laughed. Ethan took her hand, spun her around. The lights reflected off their faces, like two actors playing the leads in an expensive play. Robert sat still, watching his daughter spin, her white dress like a blizzard sweeping away everything he once had. He didn't recognize her anymore, no longer the child who once sat on his shoulders, laughing at the summer fair, no longer the girl who cried when her mother lost her hair after chemotherapy. Now, there was only a stranger named Hale, beaming at the story that had smeared her father. A gust of wind blew from the open door, lifting the tablecloth. The invitation, bearing the name Mr. Robert Hale, fell to the floor. No one picked it up. He bent down, picked up the wine-stained card, folded it, and put it in his pocket. When he looked up, he met Charles Whitmore's eyes. The man smiled, softly. The kind of smile of someone who knows the farce is over. Robert just nodded. In that moment, no one knew that the man being laughed at was the one who held the key to the entire family. But tonight wasn't the time to talk. Tonight, he just sat there, quietly, letting the loss eat into his every breath. A dull ache, like embers under the ashes. He had lost a wife before, but never a family, until this moment. And in the midst of the rising dance music, he wondered, when your loved ones become spectators in your humiliation play, will you stay silent like Robert, or will you stand up? If it were you, Temu, A, you leave forever. B, you wait for a chance to respond. Or C, you forgive and quietly move on. Be honest. What would you choose? The lights remained low. The music receded like a curtain. And in that darkness, a cold determination began to form. Robert didn't scream. He didn't rise to defend himself. Instead, he pulled out his phone, like a silent warrior, drawing a well-honed weapon, the repository of 8 years, every receipt, every text, every promise. Even Evelyn's faint voice, still there, waiting to be played. His fingers moved across the screen, calm, deliberate. Opening the voice memos, the photo albums, the contracts, the numbers dancing across the glass weren't ostentatious. They were evidence of a life he had hidden to feed his children's conscience. The sea breeze blew in from the stage door, salty and cold. It ruffled his silver hair, as if the Atlantic itself were listening. Memories surged, the hospital corridor, the cold fluorescent light on Evelyn's weary face, the weak but firm gesture. If you use pain to paint yourself, I'll make you see a mirror. Bills, signatures, midnight calls, all part of his hidden life. A whisper escaped his lips. If you want the stage, I'll give you the real light. Not hatred, but the fierce calm of a father who knew the value of the last resort. He began to organize, not out of anger, but with iron logic. Each file, each recording, ready for the moment of truth. This was no drama. This was a trial. Meanwhile, the guests kept laughing, taking pictures. They didn't know they were standing on another stage where truth was about to pull back the curtain. Robert looked at his phone screen, the cold blue light deepening his wrinkles. He thought of Evelyn's smile, her pained whisper, "I promise." He had kept that promise through silence. Now, it was time to keep it through action. His anger cooled, not exploding, but condensing into something else. Focus. A calm before the storm. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted the truth to leave, nowhere to hide. The moment hadn't come yet. He didn't rush to the stage. He held it all in, like a heart filled with timed explosives. He looked at his daughter, smiling, then at the old family photo, and a wave of bittersweet warmth crossed his face. As he put the phone back in his pocket, Robert knew the path he had chosen. This was no longer personal, but a confrontation with a false system of values. He took a deep breath, clenched his fists, let the coldness push away any weakness, and as he looked up one last time, seeing Samantha surrounded by flashbulbs, he wondered aloud, not to her, but to everyone watching. If you were in his shoes, how would you prepare to retaliate? A. Expose her immediately. B. Wait for the perfect moment, like him. Or C. Let it go. And move on? The DJ adjusted the microphone. His clear voice echoed throughout the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a few words from the bride's father? A burst of laughter broke out, half joking, half serious, rippling like waves. What would he say? Thank you for letting me sit near the kitchen door? Who would dare steal the spotlight from the bride? Robert heard every word, but his expression did not change. He set down his napkin, adjusted his coat lapel. The lines on his face were no longer those of age, but the veins of steel showing before a blow. There was silence. Then he stood up. No applause. A few eyes raised, waiting to see what the poor dad was up to. Samantha glanced at Ethan, shaking her head slightly, as if to say, let him say a few words, and then it's over. But no one in that room knew. Another chapter of the night was about to unfold. Robert walked between the rows of white tablecloth tables. Slow, steady, step by step. The sound of his shoes hitting the wooden floor was like a drumbeat. Not fast, not slow, but strangely heavy. He didn't look left or right. He just stared straight ahead, at the stage, where the lights converged, where his daughter stood, and what he was about to turn into the most opulent courtroom in America. The DJ smiled, held out the microphone, and said with a hint of humor, Sir, just a few words, okay? Robert took the microphone, his hands not shaking at all. The amplified sound turned on, ringing clearly. Thank you. Those two words hit like a dry shot, and the next table fell silent. In that moment, the light fell on his face. No longer gentle, but cold, deep, metallic. Some guests whispered, he looks different. Samantha met his gaze, and her heart contracted. Something was about to change. Time 700. Robert took a deep breath, his voice low and clear. I won't take up much of your time. I just wanted to say, I'm very grateful to be sitting here, at table 18, closest to the door. A few forced laughs. He smiled slightly. Actually, that's the best seat. From there, I can see everyone clearly, even the ones who don't look back. The air shifted. The laughter died. It felt like someone had just pulled the pin from a grenade. From the honors table, Charles Whitmore tilted his head. He sensed it. Something different. Robert's tone wasn't that of an offended man, but of one in control. Samantha tried to smile, to keep her composure, but her hands gripped the glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. Dad, maybe you should just sit still. His voice was like a blade drawn fresh from its sheath. The air grew heavy. Robert's eyes scanned the room. Those who had laughed were now silent. He spoke slowly, each word sinking like a weight. Tonight is a celebration of love and truth. Thank you for letting me witness both, albeit in opposite directions. A murmur spread through the tables. No one understood what he was doing, but everyone felt something was wrong. Samantha leaned close to Ethan, whispering, "Do something." Ethan started to rise, but Robert continued, his voice darker, slower. I'll say it just once, and after today, no one will ever forget it. He reached into his pocket. No one knew what he was taking out, but the air itself seemed to stop moving. The spotlight reflected off his gray eyes, sharp, piercing, unyielding. A breeze brushed the curtains. The chandelier flickered. Robert looked up, his eyes stormy, yet calm. Daughter, you want the world to see you have class, don't you? His voice was low, but it echoed through the hall. Then get ready. Because I'm about to show you what real truth looks like. No one breathed. 1 second, 2 seconds, and then Robert's gaze dropped to the microphone, level, strong. The storm began to form, and at the last second, when no one yet understood what was coming, he smiled, not bitterly, not hatefully, just the smile of a man who knew he was about to reclaim his lost honor. If it were you, publicly humiliated, despised in front of hundreds, what would you do? A. Stand up like Robert. Face them with an iron gaze. B. Leave in silence forever. C. Forgive and let life judge for you. Daughter, you want the real truth? Fine. Robert's voice was low, steady, like a calm sea before a storm. He reached into his coat pocket. The room fell silent, as if time itself had stopped. All eyes turned to the man in the worn blue suit. He pulled out a phone, scratched silver, rimmed with yellow, an antique forgotten by time. Robert connected it to the stage speakers. A few techs moved forward, but the DJ only shook his head, trapped in Robert's gaze. There was someone who wanted to tell you something, Samantha, he said, voice soft, yet resonant. But you wouldn't listen. Then, the click, and from the speakers, a trembling voice filled the air. Evelyn Hale's voice. Sam, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. I just want you to remember. Kindness isn't something you wear. It's something you keep, even when you're hurt. The sound was dry, fragile, carried by the faint hiss of a ventilator. It echoed through the golden hall like the whisper of a ghost. The jazz stopped. The glasses stopped. Even breath seemed afraid to move. In that gilded room, the dead were speaking. Last week, when the nurse helped Mom up, you asked, "When will Mom die so Dad can live normally again?" Sam, do you know how much pain Mom was in? A gasp rippled from the back table. Ethan set his glass down, red wine bleeding into white linen. Samantha rose, pale as ivory. "Dad, turn it off. Turn it off now." But Robert didn't move. His eyes, cold, unflinching, fixed ahead. "I heard you tell Uncle Ethan that Dad would never be good enough, that you were ashamed to be Hale. Sam, if you really believed that, then you lost the most precious thing I ever tried to hold on to. Kindness." No one moved. Faces once glowing with joy, now frozen, pale. A bride trembled, her dream cracking like glass. "If one day you use my pain to gain people's praise, then remember, at that moment, you are no longer my daughter." Times. Silence. Only the whisper of the wind through the curtains. Robert stood still. He didn't need to speak. The truth already had. An elderly woman at table 5 burst into tears. A waiter froze, tray trembling in his hands. Samantha sank into her chair. Red eyes, trembling breath. Ethan reached for her shoulder, but she recoiled, as if burned. Robert looked at her, the child who had once been his whole world. "You can say I'm poor, say I'm a failure, but there's one thing you will never do: trample on the memory of your dead mother, to color your lies." The air thickened, heavy, suffocating. Charles Whitmore tried to speak. "Mr. Hale, perhaps," but Robert interrupted, eyes never leaving his daughter. "Sit down. This is a family matter. And now, everyone has heard the voice of the only person still qualified to speak of human dignity." No one moved. The chandelier light reflected in Robert's eyes, not anger, but quiet justice. And amid the glitter of a $1 million wedding, the voice of the dead lingered, heavier than any excuse. If you were standing there, listening to the dead reveal the truth before hundreds, what would you do? Option 1, kneel down and apologize out of remorse. Option 2, run away and never look back. Or option 3, stand still, pretending nothing ever happened. The choice is yours. The room was still. The air was so thick that Samantha's shaky breathing could be heard. Robert gently pulled a second phone from his jacket pocket, a newer model, as shiny and cold as a freshly sharpened knife. "Perhaps you've heard enough," he said, his voice even. "Now let me show you." A tap. The light from the screen hit the microphone, reflecting off his face. Green numbers appeared. Checking account balance, $87 million. A murmur rose up like a tidal wave. Some gasped, others laughed dryly, a laugh of surprise mixed with fear. "This is the balance at Lockridge National Bank," Robert continued, his voice clear. I was the chief engineer for a defense cybersecurity project. I kept quiet not because I was poor, but because federal law required me to keep it secret until the contract ended. He slid the screen open. A thank you letter appeared, bearing the seal of the United States Department of Defense, with the words, "In recognition of your classified contributions to national security, Mr. Robert Hale." People began to stand. Hundreds of phones flashed, recording video. In a room where people had once scorned him, everyone now looked at Robert, as if they were witnessing a historic trial. Robert chuckled softly, his eyes turning to the Whitmore table of honor. "Mr. Charles, perhaps you know the house you live in, the Whitmore estate on Cape Cod." Charles Whitmore paused. "That house, is now legally owned by me. I bought it from the bank in 2010, after your investment company went bankrupt. And to help you save face, I only charge you a nominal rent, $1 a year." The room exploded, in silence. Diana Whitmore opened her mouth, unable to make a sound. Ethan stood there, gripping the wine glass tightly, his voice faltering. "It can't be." Robert turned the phone around and projected the image onto the rear screen. On it, the title deed clearly read, "Owner, Robert Hale." Below it was a lease for $1 a year. Samantha nearly collapsed in her chair. She looked at her father in disbelief, the light reflected in her bewildered eyes, mixed with tears that threatened to fall. Robert continued, each word as heavy as a hammer. "You despise your origins to enter their luxurious world. But you know, Samantha, that very world stands on the foundation your father built. They live in my house." A cry of "Oh my God" rang out from somewhere in the room. Those who had applauded for the bride's speech now dared not look up. Some even stood and applauded, not out of joy, but from the overwhelming feeling of witnessing true justice. Robert was silent for a few seconds. Then he pulled a sealed black envelope from his inside pocket. "Here's the last thing," he said. "The will was notarized this morning." He opened the envelope, took out a sheet of paper stamped with a red seal, and held it up to the light. His voice was no longer cold, but firm, clear, like the conclusion of a sentence. "My entire estate, including all investments, real estate, and portfolio valued at $87 million, will be transferred to the Evelyn Hale Foundation for Cancer Research." A sharp intake of breath echoed throughout the room. Robert paused for a moment, then added, "My daughter, Samantha Hale, will receive $1. $1. The exact amount of rent your husband's family pays me each year." Samantha burst into tears, collapsing onto the table. Ethan tried to step forward, but Robert raised his hand, eyes unwavering. "You need to understand. This is not a punishment. This is my way of keeping my promise to your mother, who wanted to see you learn the true value of character." He folded the will, put it back in the envelope, and placed it on the stage. No one spoke, no music, no clinking of knives or forks. Only the sound of breathing. In that moment, all that had once been pride, honor, luxury, melted like sand in his hands. Robert took a step back, raised his head, looked straight at the faces that had once looked down on him, and said softly, "Perhaps now everyone understands. Real class is not in the seat or in the husband's last name, but in how we keep our promises." He set down the microphone and turned away. No one dared to interrupt. The only sound was the slow tapping of his heels on the wooden floor. Each step, a hammering sound that closed the coffin of a false era. If it were you, standing in the middle of that room, where truth was revealed and honor was crushed, what would you choose? Ask for forgiveness and start over from the ashes? B. Pretend to be strong to cover up the shame? Or C. Dare to stand up and face the consequences of your actions? The murmurs in the hall faded, leaving only Samantha's hoarse sobs echoing under the crystal dome. She screamed, no longer able to maintain her perfect bridal pose in her gorgeous white gown. Her mascara ran in 2 black streaks. Her eyes seemed to be pleading, but no one came forward. Ethan bowed his head, his hands shaking, his lips pressed together. He didn't look at his wife, nor did he dare look at his parents. Below, hundreds of guests stood scattered, phones raised high, the light of the screens illuminating their stunned and eager faces, as if watching a live execution. Robert turned. There was no more anger, no more pain, only calm. The storm had passed. He looked around, seeing in everyone's eyes a mixture of pity and awe, fear and respect. He gently adjusted the microphone, his voice deep, warm, and clear. Thank you, everyone. Because tonight, I learned something valuable. Silence is not weakness. Silence is sometimes just the stage before the truth speaks. A few claps rang out, sporadic at first, then spreading like waves. Not applause, the kind of applause one gives for justice when it is finally done. Robert bowed his head. The light on his silver hair made him look like a warrior who had just laid down his sword after a long battle. He set down the microphone and turned to leave. The click of his heels echoed, cold and steady, in the hall, each beat a farewell to all the years he had been invisible. Samantha collapsed, her sobs muffled. Ethan tried to help her up, but she shook his hand, looking at her father with red eyes, her voice trembling. Dad, why do this? Why in front of everyone? Robert stopped in the doorway, but did not turn around. Because you chose to humiliate others in front of everyone, Samantha. I am only returning the justice you owed your mother. No one could breathe. The man did not shout, did not curse. He simply spoke as if closing a chapter in a book, without adding or subtracting. He stepped outside. The great doors of Cape Haven opened, and a cold sea breeze swept in, sweeping across the silks and the wine-stained tablecloth. Behind him, applause broke out again, punctuated by sobs, a few sniffles, a few murmurs. He was right. The party lights merged with the moonlight on the porch. Robert headed out to the parking lot, where his old gray sedan waited. He started the engine, his headlights sweeping over the flower beds in front of the gate. The white roses now scattered. A light rain began to fall. But to him, it wasn't rain. It was cleansing. Rainwater mingled with a single tear on his face, not of regret, but of relief. He had kept his promise to Evelyn. He had taught the world that dignity need not be flashy, and in the cruelest way, he had saved his own soul. The car rolled away, leaving behind a cacophony of sounds. People calling, phones ringing, piano notes off-key. But to Robert, it was all just a distant echo of a dream gone. If you were Robert, just walking out of the room where it all fell apart, what would you feel? Relief, because you finally got to live? Empty, Because you lost something called family? Or regret? Because justice is sometimes too expensive. 6 months later. The Boston sky was as blue as glass washed clean after a winter storm. Robert Hale stood in his lawyer's office, looking at the thick contract before him. Printed in bold on the first page, transfer of assets, $87,000 to the Evelyn Foundation for Cancer Research. He picked up the pen, paused for a second. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock. 8 years of silence, one stormy night, and now, a signature to end it all. Pen touched paper. The ink spread, thick and decisive. When the last line closed, he felt as if someone had lifted a weight from his chest. The lawyer held out his hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Hale. As of today, you have made the largest donation in the history of Massachusetts." Robert just smiled. It wasn't me. It was Evelyn. That afternoon, he went to St. Brooke Hospital, where a new wing was being dedicated. On the bronze plaque, the Evelyn Hale Memorial Wing. The sunlight streamed through the large window, shining directly on his face. The light reflected in his eyes, making them sparkle with tears. He placed his hand on the name, his fingers trembling. For so many years he had held that hand. Now only a cold metal name remained. But within it was the soul of the woman who had taught him how to live with dignity. Children's voices drifted down the hallway, patients laughing and playing. Robert watched them through the glass. The children had bald heads and bandaged hands, but their eyes were bright. A nurse whispered to a colleague that Grant saved a dozen new experimental programs. Robert heard it and smiled. "In the end, you saved the others. Just like I promised," he said softly, almost in a monologue. His voice caught in the silence. In that moment, the wind outside the porch gently shook the hospital flag. The sound of metal against the pole was thin and clear like wind chimes. Evelyn was still here, not in body, but in the good things that continued to breathe. When he left the hospital, the sun was setting behind the skyscrapers. He walked through the grounds, where there was a row of white lilies, his wife's favorite flower. The wind blew, the petals tilting slightly, as if someone had just nodded in greeting. Robert took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the spring afternoon, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. No more anger, no more regret. Only enough room left to forgive. For his daughter, for himself, and for what could not be saved. On the way home, he drove over the Charles Bridge. The river below reflected the red sunset, the wind blowing through his silver hair. The car radio played an old jazz song Evelyn had loved, the one she listened to every Sunday afternoon while baking bread. Robert laughed softly, just enough to make the tears spill. "I did it, Eve," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Now you can sleep peacefully, and I am finally alive again." If it were you, after giving up everything to keep a promise, how would you feel? Also, peaceful, because you've completed your mission. B, empty, because you've lost your only loved one. Or, still can't forgive yourself for what the past has taken away. Beton. Honest. Do you think, after all, forgiveness is really a form of rebirth?